With Final Fantasy VII under their belt, Squaresoft decided to carry on the series. Given the money they made, who could blame them? Their new brainchild was Final Fantasy VIII, a game which takes the meaning of ironic and stretches it to whole new lengths. If Final Fantasy VII took the piss a bit with the human factor, you ain't seen nothing yet. This game had barely anything fantastical to do with it whatsoever. The only things that they had anything to do with fantasy were the monsters and the GFs. God, we'll get onto the GFs later. You start off with an amazing piece of cinematic eye candy. A bit confusing to say that you're just starting the bloody thing, but the fight between these two guys is pretty damn impressive. Although I don't get what the attraction to feathers is, and I've completed this game 14 times. The reason for this fight becomes obvious when you start in a hospital bed. What an introduction to a character, by the way. Cloud got a big fight as an introduction. Squall, or whatever you choose to call him, gets a hospital bed and a rather sexy instructor bollocking you for fighting in school, although you were obviously in a bloody vast wasteland outside the school. Didn't she watch the opening cinematic? Either way, you get an introduction to Squall. He's an I-want-to-be-left-alone kind of guy who likes to have his privacy. He turns over in bed and spots a girl who he thinks he knows, but then forgets about it and goes back to sleep. After this, we're thrown into a test against a monster called Ifrit, a fire demon not new to old hats of Final Fantasy. This is an old trick of Squaresoft's, and it really does show through quite boldly here. The trick is that new players are stunned with the enormity of these creatures and the fact that you get to control them, yet to seasoned players they know what these creatures are like and would have nothing better to summon them to arms once again. After you beat Ifrit, you get a tutorial from your trainer named Quistis about the use of GFs. Now, a GF, standing for Guardian Force, is an entity that gives itself to a person it deems worthy to master it. They give the player certain abilities and allow them to use different attacks or junction magic to certain stats. You retire to your bed and wake the next day with the prospect of a mission. Now, on to junctioning magic. This must be one of the most awkward but useful things in existence. Say you have a fire spell in your magical arsenal. You could junction it to power your attack and cause your attack power to increase. The same goes for your health. If you junction a powerful cure spell to your health, then you boost your HP through the roof. This comes in handy as well if you junction certain magics to status, attack or defense. It will increase your guard you have a certain magic. Say if you junction thunder to your status defense, it will give you a better defense against thunder attacks, and if you junctioned it to status attack, you'd have the added bonus of lightning to your damage. It can be all a bit confusing at first, but seriously helpful throughout the game. You now go to the main entrance to meet your teammates. Zell, an ADD sufferer with a point to prove, and Cypher, a whingy bully type who acts like he's got a cucumber up his arse. You're also introduced to your principal, Sid, a now well-known recurring name in the Final Fantasy series. After this, you're sent off to aid soldiers on an island against the Galbadian troops. You are informed that you'll be ranked on your performance, and this rank will determine your seed level. Without any decent knowledge of what the hell seed is, you bugger off to this island and fight, try to slow down, a giant metal tarantula. This is all good and everything, but where's the fucking fantasy? They had a giant tarantula in Wild Wild West, for Christ's sake. You can even drive to the port you have to go to in a fucking car. This is to be one of the most realistic fantasy games I may have ever played. Aside the monsters and the junction in magic, I can't see anything that can constitute as fantasy. The weapon you use, a gunblade, can easily be created in real life, and so could any of the weapons evident in this game. Here are some of the scenarios that you come across in Final Fantasy VIII. An assassination of a sorceress, ooh, fantasy. A military-style infiltration of a train in a school, called a garden, which flies, as if that fools you. A trip into outer space to find a reason why your love interest has got into a coma, and a trip to a desolate spaceship only to find it's been run by aliens. My personal favourite is the dream world you go into, where you and two of your characters in your party become completely different characters and tell a completely different story, which actually takes place in the past before Squall. I don't know what Squaresoft were thinking when they came up with the idea for this, but maybe someone showed them it's a fucking fantasy game. Throwing a few monsters and fantasy-like situations into a game doesn't really make it worthy of the title fantasy. It should have been called How Many Different Genres Can We Get Into a Single Game? The genres range from tactical espionage, science fiction, Andy McNabb, and finally a smattering of fucking fantasy. The one saving grace of this game is the soundtrack, once again composed by Nobuo Uematsu. And it rocks. The battle music for the Dream World is outstanding and remains one of my top 5 Final Fantasy tracks. Speaking of which, my all-time favourite Final Fantasy song is in this game. It's called Eyes on Me, and it's an amazing song, the first in the series to actually have lyrics. And I mean proper lyrics, not fucking choral chanting of Sephiroth over and over again. But as I say, the soundtrack is really the only thing holding this game up. Despite my panning of it, if Final Fantasy VIII wasn't released as a Final Fantasy title and released as maybe a side project of Squaresoft's, then it would actually be a bloody good game, and I honestly thoroughly enjoyed it. It's actually one of my favourite games. I just wish it wouldn't have been called a Final Fantasy, maybe Squall's Epic Odyssey or some bollocks like that. I have to say, my favourite thing about the game is just how easy it is. One of the big complaints about Final Fantasy as a series is the time it takes to level up, and Final Fantasy VIII combats this very well. On previous Final Fantasy titles, you had a percentage increase on how much EXP you had to earn before leveling up. To get to level 10, you needed 1,000 experience. To get to level 11, you then need 1,100 experience, and so on. Final Fantasy VIII says fuck this and keeps the limit of experience to get to the next level around 1,200. Later on in the game, you find monsters that give you 2,000 experience in battle, so instant level per battle. Although this was great, they weren't stupid at Squaresoft. If you reach level 100 with all characters, you couldn't beat the game, because one of the final bosses uses level 5 death, and after that, you're fucked. As I say, it's a great game, and if you get over the lack of fantasy and appreciation for what it is, then I guarantee you'll enjoy this. Join me for my next instalment, which is the final part of the Holy Trilogy, Final Fantasy IX.